Hi everybody, welcome back. Good to see you guys. So we have about 4 minutes till class time. It's 2:16. It's Thursday, March 11th. Good to be with you guys, and just hang in there, and we'll be starting in a few minutes. Hey Lan, hi Janae. Good to see you guys. Hi Anna, how's it going? Hey Steven, welcome back. Hi Remy. Just a couple minutes until class, so be right with you guys. Hey Corey. Welcome back everybody. Hope you guys are having a good week and all your other classes are going well so far. This is kind of like my last meeting of the week. I do have a few small things in the morning on Friday from 9 to 11, but it's sort of like my Friday in a way, this Thursday night or Thursday afternoon class. Just a few moments here. Hey Nathan, welcome back. All right, guys, I'm going to let it get started. It's pretty much 2:20. So thanks again for being here, and always appreciate you guys' attendance. Just make sure to leave some type of comment behind in our chat just to keep a record of your attendance in these meetings. And what we're going to do today is just continue to finish up the notes on Chapter 4. We have 2 more meetings to go over those notes, so there's plenty of time. The next thing that's coming forward after we finish Chapter 4 is the upcoming midterm exam. That is going to be, sorry, I'm looking at it here, Thursday the 25th, so that's 2 weeks away. So between now and then, we're finishing Chapter 4 on Tuesday next week, so we have today and Tuesday, 2 lectures. Then we have 2 review sessions. I'll distribute the study guide for the midterm exam late in the weekend. And then we'll have a couple of different class meetings where we'll go over the whole study guide, and then you guys will have your exam on Thursday the 25th. Then we'll break for spring break, and we'll come back after that to resume the rest of the semester. So just kind of keeping you notified on the schedule. This is all listed in the syllabus, but I'm just kind of calling your mind to it while we're all here together. So just know that the next major thing in the class is the midterm on the 25th. But before then, we have to finish chapter 4 and do our midterm review sessions. So, all right. And as usual, if you ever have any kind of questions, comments, thoughts, comments, reactions, whatever it is, please put them in the chat and we'll take them on as they come. So chapter 4 is all about knowledge and the limits of human knowledge. So we started off talking about the information in chapter 4, but we didn't quite finish it, of course. So let's just slowly work our way back into this topic and continue through the lecture. The first thing I guess we discussed when we opened chapter 4 is just what the general definition of knowledge is. So let's begin with that. Who can tell me, based on our meeting last time and the book and everything, what is the consensus definition of knowledge? Like, what is the overall idea that people have of knowledge? It's a definition or concept that involves 3 major qualities or criteria. They say that knowledge has these 3 major pieces. So someone can tell me that. Knowledge is a blank, blank, blank. What? When you have knowledge, you have to have 3 things. And what are they? Someone will let me know, and then we'll go from there. So the question for us right now is, what's the definition of knowledge according to epistemologists and so on? What do you think? So this is like our first note from chapter 4 from last meeting. Hi, Kellen, and hi, everyone else. Good to see everybody. Okay, JTB saying Lan. Very good, but very brief. Can we say a little more? Just tell me what those different letters stand for in the abbreviation. But that is right, yes. It's information that we believe, which is true, and for which we have justification, correct. So knowledge is a justified true belief. And each of those different qualities has to be present in order for knowledge to exist. So first of all, a person has to think something is true. That's what a belief is. If you don't think it's true, then you don't know it's true. So you have to at least think so. Second, though, it actually has to be true. It has to really objectively be a true proposition for you to have knowledge of it. So you can't know something if you're getting it wrong. Like, you cannot know that 2 + 2 is 5 because it isn't. You cannot know that I am 100 years old because I'm not. You cannot know that the moon is made of cheese because it's simply not made of cheese, and so that's not something anyone could know because knowledge requires correct answer. You can have a false belief, but you can't have false knowledge, okay? Because a belief is what you think is true, but truth is what is true, okay? So you have to have a belief that something's true, but it has to also really be true. And then the third thing is you have to have justification. Justification is simply having good reasons or evidence to support a person's belief. So like a lucky guess that turns out to be right is not knowledge. If I just randomly guess the year that someone was born, I don't know when they were born. It was just that I had a belief at the time which turned out to be true. Hi, Matthias, and hi, everyone. Good to see everybody. So for knowledge to exist, you have to think something's true. It actually is, and you have reasons behind thinking so. If a student filled in a bubble on a multiple choice test and just happened to get it right by guessing, they got the answer right in terms of their credit, but they didn't actually know the answer, unlike a student who filled it in with a full mastery of reasons as to why it's the right answer. So anyway, guys, to know, you have to have a justified true belief. After that, we talked a little bit about what are some different views of where most human knowledge comes from, and we distinguished the difference between empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism is the view that most human knowledge comes from the 5 senses and observation that we can do by means of the 5 senses. So the 5 senses are sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. And empiricists are the people who say most of the knowledge that we have as humans comes from the things that we can observe using the 5 senses. So physical evidence, scientific evidence that is based on things that you've observed and data that you've collected through observation. This would all fall within the realm of empiricism. On the other hand, there's rationalism, though, and rationalism is a different school of thought. Rationalists say that most human knowledge comes from just pure ideas, reason, and abstract thought. So with rationalism, think of the knowledge that you have in areas like mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, and all that. In that case, when you're thinking about the properties of a square or a circle or a mathematical equation, you can compute the knowledge without thinking or without using any of the 5 senses. Just sitting back and with closing your eyes, you can start to deduce axioms of geometry. So rationalists think most of our knowledge comes from those things that can only be understood through abstract thought and through pure ideas. I kind of told you guys that in my own mind, both sources of knowledge are complementary, and they kind of serve to fill in the full picture of human knowledge that we do have. So I don't really think that one or the other is like the superior version of where most knowledge comes from. We have rational knowledge. We also have empirical knowledge. From there, we discussed what evidence is, and we talked about how evidence is something that can prove or disprove a claim. Okay, so like maybe you're a detective and you're trying to prove that some person is guilty. You might use the fingerprints that you've recovered at the crime scene, which matches their print, as a piece of evidence that tries to establish guilt. Or you could be a defense attorney, and you could be the kind of person who's trying to make the case they're not guilty by presenting different evidence in court. Yeah, Kellen, it usually is like that with a lot of things. You have like rival schools of thought, you know, liberal and conservative or something, but really the truth and what's best for people is something that has aspects of both. Yeah, that's generally a true observation, I think, with some exceptions, but anyway. So next up, yeah, that's what evidence is. It's something that can prove or disprove a claim. And we talked about what are some basic, reliable sources of evidence that we always use. One of them is just direct experience, being a witness to something and seeing or perceiving it yourself somehow. That's probably some of the most strong evidence that you can have, because seeing is believing, as they say, right? Another case of evidence, though, is when you're not there and you didn't see it, but someone relayed the information to you. That's called testimony. Testimony is evidence that you get from the report of other people, either spoken or written or disseminated through the media or electronically. So we can't be there to experience and witness everything. So sometimes we have to just take other people's word for it, as it's either communicated to us informally or through media channels or whatever the case may be, through political leadership or whatever. So sometimes there's evidence based on testimony. Sometimes it's based on direct experience. If you're a witness to a crime, the evidence that you have is seeing it. If you are a juror and you hear testimony from the witness, the evidence that you have is their testimony reported to you. Another kind of evidence can just be memory. Memory is sort of like your experiences, except that you can recall them later. So, or testimony that you can later recall having heard or read. So memory is just the capacity of the brain to hold previously perceived or attested to information for later use. If you didn't have memories, then you'd always be at a loss as to how you got where you are, what's going on, what happened before now. But thankfully, we do have some effective memory. You know, our short-term memory is generally okay, and long-term memory is generally okay. It depends on the person. Sometimes people can have cognitive injuries or disabilities that impair their memory. Of course, you can become a little older and start to go into cognitive decline for any number of neurological or physical reasons. Of course, certain types of drug use or addiction can impair functioning of the brain and memory. But for the most part, we have memory to rely on, and it does help us have evidence of previously perceived or attested to information. And then last, there's inference. Inference is evidence that's based on you drawing conclusions from other related facts. So say, for example, you see the footprints that lead up to your porch, and a package was never received for you that you had sent off for. You might use the footprints as evidence that the package was stolen. Now, that's not seeing the package being stolen, so it's not the direct experience of it, and it's not testimony. Of course, since you weren't there and no one told you, there's no memory about it that you could have, but it's inference. You're drawing the conclusion of the intruder that took the package from the observation of the footprints. So we take evidence from these different sources, and evidence is stronger when it's corroborated by multiple different sources that all confirm each other. Sometimes we have conflicting sources of evidence, though, and it would be nice if life was uncomplicated and all the evidence just pointed to the same conclusion. But sometimes we have conflicting and contradictory sources of evidence, like conflicting media reports or conflicting scientific studies. And in that case, you have to make determinations about which is the more reliable source, because if they contradict each other, they can't both be true. If one person says, a bomb went off at the mall, and another person says, no, that's a rumor and it didn't happen, they cannot both be correct. So this is a hypothetical example, but in life that happens all the time. You hear one media source says this is true, another says no, it's not. In that case, you have to make judgments about which is the more credible and the more worthy of of being relied on. Okay, so I think after that, didn't we talk about false memories for a minute, everybody? This is just my review of last lecture for a moment, but false memory is when a person thinks they can remember something that didn't actually happen, or it didn't happen the way that they thought that it did. As reliable as memory can be, it's not perfect, and sometimes we can have errors in our ability to retrieve information from the past, especially when things are chaotic. Sometimes when there's trauma involved, our memories can deviate from the actual course of events. So we have to be at least willing to give some degree of initial skepticism towards memorial recall and the ability to accurately and vividly remember things in the past. We talked about, I think, the Mandela effect as one kind of pop culture example of how memories can sometimes be false. And we talked about how false eyewitness testimony sometimes leads to mistaken conviction, and that that's actually the leading cause of mistaken convictions when they happen in the law. I guess, did we talk about hearsay and anecdote, everybody? That's a question for you, because I kind of didn't get a chance to quickly review the tape of the last lecture, so I'm not exactly sure where we left off. But I think that we talked about hearsay and anecdote. Maybe you can confirm if that's the last piece of notes that we went through. Just let me know. If you just go back and you examine, yeah? Okay, so just last word on those. Two unreliable sources of evidence that are generally not the best if you have another more solid source of evidence to go with are hearsay and anecdote. So what hearsay is evidence that's testimonial, but the problem is that it's not firsthand testimony. It's testimony that's passed through several other people before it arrives to you. And so when it comes to hearsay, a lot of times, because the information has gone through so many different individuals before it makes its way to you, that is often going to lead to certain facts being omitted or other things being added. And that's just because it's hard for people to maintain a consistent body of information when there's no controls on the passage of it from one party to another. So when you're last in the link of the testimonial chain, you should harbor some reasonable skepticism about the accuracy of what you're hearing. This is a lot of times when you hear gossip and rumor, it's hearsay. So unless it's the only evidence that you have to go by, it's not the best one to use. There's also anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence is evidence that's based on personal testimonies or personal experiences of just one person. So the problem with that type of evidence is that it's often not indicative of the mainstream of cases. Oftentimes it's an anecdote, but the anecdote is an outlier case or something that's not common. So like if a person said, for example, that they don't believe coronavirus is so deadly because they have a personal relationship with someone who had it and that person did not get really that sick. Well, that's a randomly chosen, cherry-picked example of one person that didn't have heavy symptoms. But of course, that would not be a good basis for you to say, so the disease is therefore not that harmful, because this is not reliable evidence if it's drawn from just a single case. If you examine the mainstream of cases, you'll see that symptoms and severity vary quite a bit from individual to individual. Same with the other example I gave of a person who says smoking isn't really that bad because they know someone that smoked lifelong and isn't really having any health problems. Again, that's a single case, an anecdote. And if you just examine the medical and scientific information, you will see that you shouldn't expect to have no health impacts at all from a lifelong habit of smoking, even if it's theoretically possible in some people with good genes or whatever the case is. So that's anecdotal evidence. You're better served relying on a broader base of evidence than what one anecdote can provide. Sometimes the anecdote is drawn from your own experience. Other times it's drawn from testimony of others. But an anecdote by itself is not the most powerful evidence. Okay, so from there, we're getting into the next part of chapter 4. The next part, the next topic in it, it talks about experts and the credibility of experts. So a good source of information is the testimony of experts. If you have access to professionals and experts in a certain field, and you kind of just pick their brain about what they're an expert on, then the knowledge and the facts they're aware of is usually very high level and credible testimony. And if an expert's testimony contradicts what you've heard through either hearsay or through anecdotal reports, then you should defer to the expert's position rather than the anecdote. But even though experts are credible sources of testimony and information, not all experts are created equal even. And sometimes you have experts that disagree with each other. You know, like one research institution will release a study that says a glass of wine each night is good for heart health. And another institution will release a separate study with a different methodology or something, and they will say, no, we have found that that's not actually true, and it's not so good for you to drink even in small amounts. So what do you believe and what are you supposed to believe when you have, legitimate experts on both sides that are disagreeing with each other? Well, that's when you have to start to make judgments about the level of expertise and credibility of those two people. So we're going to now list out what are different factors to consider as you evaluate the testimony of experts. So 4 factors to consider about so-called experts. So one of these factors is simply the education factor. So what we mean by this is you should take into account how much education the person has, what level of attainment, and from what type of academic institutions did they get it. So obviously, educational attainment is one important metric to use to gauge the credibility of an expert. So if the person has high school degree, professional certificate, bachelor's degree, master's, PhD, medical doctor, whatever the case is, the higher up the educational attainment scale the person has gone, then the more credibility that they have earned with respect to their views and positions. So more education, of course, matters. I mean, that's not to say that people cannot be very wise, resourceful, brilliant even, that have not attained the same level of formal education. Of course, that can happen, but as you guys know, since you're students working on your own progress through school, it's not like these degrees and stuff are just handed out in the corner to anybody that wants them. You really have to prove yourself, and you have to really develop a lot of knowledge through this rigorous process of, this long gauntlet of education that you're going through. So anybody who's come out on the other end of that with some degrees has more knowledge, and the more of it, then generally the more reliable the person would be. But it's not just what level of attainment, it's also the nature of the institution where they got these titles and degrees from, because not every institution has the same type of reputation. For example, you know that there are some schools that are like well-respected and have long-standing reputations, kind of brick and mortar campuses and all of that. And then you've also got some like online universities and things that are not fully accredited. And if you get a master's degree from like DeVry University or something, or like ITT Tech, it's not necessarily coming with the same kind of esteem and the same professional competitiveness as a degree from a more well-recognized and fully accredited brick and mortar institution. So educational attainment is one thing, how high up the scale, but also from which type of institution or where did they get it. So if you have 2 different experts and you're trying to make a tie-breaking decision about which one to break in favor of or to rely on, you might use education as one of those bases for your decision. Now, another factor to consider about experts is experience. Experience is independent from education because you can have people that have a lot of professional experience in the field without a ton of formal education. And the opposite is possible too. You can have someone that's from the biggest, best Ivy League schools, but they haven't yet, done much in the field. Maybe they're fresh out of their degree program or grad school or something. They haven't yet worked a lot in the field. So all things being equal, more professional experience, a more long-standing track record of working in that field adds credibility to the person's views and so on. So if you have 2 experts with an equal level of education and so on, but one has more experience, maybe that's something to consider in judging the credibility of their testimony versus the other person. And then there's also reputation. Reputation is about how is this person viewed by other colleagues and peers within the field. Do other professionals within that field view this individual as a member in good standing of the profession who's got credibility and a good reputation, or is this person instead looked at as a outlier, a marginal figure, somebody outside the mainstream within that domain of expertise? The reputation of the person makes a big difference. I was thinking of something as I was just mentioning this last point, so while I have it on my mind, let me say this. Like, I was talking about how sometimes you have experts which offer you different views. When it comes to experience, one other thing to consider is not just how much, but is it relevant experience in the topic the person claims expertise about? So as an example, right, last year with Trump, there was this guy, Dr. Scott Atlas, that he's a radiologist from Stanford University, and he's not an infectious disease specialist, but he kind of was promoted to a high level of advisor for Trump because Trump liked the fact that he was willing to agree with him and say stuff like, who cares so much about the virus, not a big deal, just let people go out with no masks, no social distancing, and maybe we'll get to herd immunity. So he was basically contradicting the CDC and experts like Fauci, who are infectious disease specialists, who are saying, no, we got to mitigate this, we got to distance, we got to quarantine, we got to lock down until we get safe access to a vaccine. So look, you got two experts, one saying we're overdoing it with all the distancing and shutdowns. Another guy saying, no, it's absolutely important for public health. Well, the thing is, though, Atlas's experience is not in infectious diseases. It's in radiology, which has nothing to do with that. So although both have a great education and, they're both esteemed titles, doctor, etc., one person has experience that's relevant to the topic of infectious disease and one person doesn't. So it's just one more example to think of. And I guess reputation-wise, Atlas's reputation in the field of infectious diseases is just nil. It doesn't exist because it's not what he works on. So just some examples, I guess, to reference the current discussion. One more factor to consider about experts would be accomplishments. Okay, so does this individual that you're hearing from have honors, awards, titles, or publications that could add further credibility to their views, further weight to their testimony? The more of those things, the better, obviously. So if a person has a long publication record, then obviously that gives further credence to the things they say and write. And if they have academic honors and titles, they're winning awards from National Academy of Sciences or whatever the case may be, that further elevates their profile and their resume academically and adds to the degree of expertise and credibility. So anyways, 4 factors to consider about experts when you are having a tough time determining how much trust should I place in the words or ideas or statements of this so-called expert. You might measure that question against how they score along these various criteria here. And in some cases where you're making comparative judgments about 2 different experts or whatever, then you can compare them against each other along the same criteria. Okay, so in general, you want to try to find the best evidence for whatever claim that you're trying to build up or whatever topic that you're trying to build up knowledge about. The credibility of evidence is higher when it's confirmed by multiple sources that all are consistent and confirming. Don't allow confirmation bias to cause you to accept a lower standard of proof either. Sometimes if you have a favored hypothesis, you will accept weaker evidence that attempts to prove it. So suppose that you want it to be true, you just hope it's true that wine is good for you when you drink at night because you love wine and that's you're like a wine drinker. So you're going to latch onto the first study that comes out from anywhere that says it's good for you and that it does have these health benefits and just disregard all the studies that say maybe that's not true. I'm not saying I have a view on this either way about the wine question, but what I'm just using it as an example of is if you have a desire for the hypothesis to be true, don't allow that to cause you to have a bias in the pursuit of evidence as though you accept lower standards of evidence to make the claim credible. Sometimes a favored hypothesis isn't true, so just try to be objective, that's all. If evidence is out there and it tends to disprove something that you would hope to be true, it's time to just move on and accept that it's false instead of seeking under every corner of the internet or something for some type of confirming evidence and just taking a weak study or whatever as sufficient to make the case. Okay, so that's some factors to consider about experts and a little supplemental discussion about evidence. Next up, I'm going to talk to you guys about what are some different resources that you can utilize when you're going out into the world and trying to do research. So when you want to have knowledge, you have to have information. And the information's not already there in your head. You got to go and find it from somewhere. That means you got to seek it out and do research of some kind. So knowledge depends on the finding of information and facts, and that, of course, depends on doing research. But where can you go to find information for the purposes of research? So in other words, what are some research resources? That's what the book calls them. So we're going to list out a few of those. Okay, research resources. Now, of course, this book it does not assume the existence of a global pandemic. So some of these resources that we're going to talk about may be more or less accessible in the time of pandemic. Well, at least one of them, which is the library. But anyway, I'm going to mention it because it is in the book, and it is a good resource in better times. I don't know, maybe there is access to the library of some variety. I haven't really investigated this lately, but the library. What is the library? So it's a great place to find information and facts and to study as well. Either the public library or libraries that are available at school. They have a wealth of monographs, books, journals, periodicals for you to just use for free. So it's a time-honored institution. It's free information. No one has to pay for their library card or for access to those materials. So it's a great way to find facts and information for any research subject. A lot of times, especially a bigger library, has an interlibrary loan system. So if they don't have a book in their own collection, they can simply request that it be shipped to them. So then you can check it out whenever it arrives. And usually they'll give you a call or an email to let you know that your requested book has been delivered through the interlibrary loan system. So it's a great place to request material. And also, when libraries are open and running, I mean, they're great places to study because they're quiet, they're studious, they're academic, they're filled with books. So it kind of gives you that study vibe. At Orange Coast College, I would used to love to go to the library to sometimes grade and just sort of see student life and kind of be in a peaceful place where you can do work. So take advantage of it if and when it's available. I don't know if it's necessarily on the horizon right now. A lot of public buildings, of course, are all shut down, but the library is a good place to get facts and information. It's a good resource. Okay, so aside from that, there's also academic journals. So no matter what topic you're interested in researching, there's definitely an academic journal. There's many academic journals devoted to every possible topic in the academy. So whether it's physics, chemistry, philosophy, history, literature, art, poetry, there's academic journals for every topic under the sun. And they're always very good for the purposes of research because the quality of writing that makes it into these journals is always very high. And I know about that because I am myself, of course, a professor and an academic. I've published a few articles in certain journals, and academic journals have a high rejection rate. For anything to make it onto the printed page of such a journal, it has to pass through this peer review process. So you have referees that take your manuscript, and there's a couple of possible results. The most common result is rejection. They don't accept your paper. So the high rejection rate is a norm within academic journals. Sometimes, though, you're lucky and it gets accepted with no comment. Other cases, they send it back to you and they ask you to do revisions, and then they'll take a second look at it whether they want to accept it after the revisions. But anyway, any kind of material that passes through this gauntlet of peer review and criticism and appears in such a journal has already been thoroughly vetted for quality and evaluated in all these different ways. So therefore, whatever you're reading in such journals is always some of the highest quality, cutting edge academic research and knowledge in that field of study. One thing about them, though, to be fair, is that they're written for an audience of fellow specialists. This is not like beginner level material when you're reading it in a professional academic journal. So it's sometimes a little intimidating to step up to that level of precision and technical language often. But if you're willing to kind of take a bit of an academic challenge and kind of butt your head against these great pieces of work, then academic journals are a solid place to research. Where can you find them? Sometimes you can find them online, and you can request materials through the journal itself or even subscribe to it for a fee. In other cases, volumes of these journals are available in public or school libraries for you to request. And then there's also certain websites that have like troves of academic journal material that have been made available to the public. So JSTOR is one of them, JSTOR.org. That's a common resource for researchers, graduate students, and professors. So those are some nice places to look for academic journal material if you ever want to find that kind of content. Okay, another good research resource are government documents. Okay, so every developed, Western nation has a whole bunch of official government agencies that are responsible for providing information to the public about whatever topic that falls within the jurisdiction of their agency. And so we as citizens should make free use of all the information that we can gain access to as citizens by looking up the facts that government documents give us. So, suppose you want to know about labor statistics, then you could go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, either online or through another source, and you could find current data about labor statistics. If you want to know about crime statistics, then the Department of Justice provides that and disseminates it to the public as well. If you want to know facts about our environmental status quo, then you could look up publicly available information provided by the Environmental Protection Agency. So anyways, these different government agencies' whole mission is to collect data, build up knowledge, and then make it available to the public for our consumption. So take use of it, take advantage of the fact that we have these agencies and these professionals working for us. Also, sometimes government documents reach the public through declassification of formerly classified material, and sometimes it reaches the public through leaks to the media. Oftentimes I've found that certain website called Scrib, which also has an app, I'll just put it here in the chat as a side note, but Scrib.com oftentimes has a lot of these declassified or leaked documents that otherwise wouldn't have made it out to the public, and sometimes Freedom of Information Act requests result in the release of such material. So take advantage of all the government documents either available through the public agencies and their websites or through other websites that house declassified or leaked government documents. The last thing I would say about it is this. If you're living in a society where the government was totally corrupt and the agencies were just filled with political hacks or something, then you might worry that the government document information is itself skewed, biased, or unscientific, But thankfully, in the United States, we do have career professionals staffing these agencies. And so those are like nonpartisan career professionals that work for many different administrations, both Republican and Democrat. But of course, if there was political interference in an agency, then that might cause you to have more skepticism about the accuracy of what they provide to the public. Like if we had a president saying, I don't want us to shut anything down, and they're like leaning heavily on the CDC to give guidance to the public that says you don't have to mask and everything, then you might worry that political interference was corrupting the objectivity of this public information. But for the most part, we have really solid and deeply rooted career professionals in all these different agencies. So we're not, I think, the likeliest country to see a breakdown in, the accuracy and so forth of our government agencies. Okay, so anyways, another one of these research resources to mention. Now, of course, there's the internet. And I guess probably for like most young people and such, and just everyday people, right? The internet is probably your go-to source for whatever information you want to research. You can just Google things. It's always just a couple of clicks away for you to find information on something. And then once you're looking at it, you can just go down the rabbit hole, find a bunch of other links on the same topic. The only thing I would say, though, about internet research is that it's self-directed. And since it's self-directed, there's no authority that controls which type of sites you go to except for yourself. So you kind of have to make sure that you don't veer off into the weeds of like conspiracy theory websites or weird blogs that are run by people with no professional knowledge. That's the one issue I would say that's problematic about internet research. Sometimes people with no professional knowledge or expertise can create a website that looks just as polished and professional as like mainstream journalism, but it doesn't have at all the same standards of accuracy or objectivity or professionalism. Philip, you're saying, can't you get access to the National Library or something online for government documents? Yes, I think the National Libraries of Congress are available online. And so for the most part, yes, internet access to government documents is a norm for sure. Anyway, like I was saying, sometimes people, say, for example, you're finding a lot of information on social media sites or on like YouTube or something. Well, if you've been watching like conspiracy theory videos and stuff on YouTube, then the algorithm knows this about you, and it starts to serve you up other recommended items in your suggested views, right? So it keeps serving you up the things that it thinks you want to watch, because how many clicks it gets determines the ad revenue for the web hosting service. So in a way, this causes some people to fall into a rabbit hole of like self-perpetuating conspiracy theory beliefs, because it's like, it's a runaway train. It's a snowball effect. Once the algorithm determines that this is the kind of content that you want, then it kind of self-selects it for you, and your information diet gets framed around these unhealthy research habits. So make sure that as you self-direct your study and research online, that you try to go to credible sources and check them against available fact checkers and stuff like that. Okay, so that's internet. And then one more, I guess, expert interview. As we were just saying, experts, when you have access to them, and you guys do pretty much, because as students, you know, the professors in your various classes are at least experts on the topic that they teach in school. So when you can sit down and have a nice conversation, take good notes, sometimes if they let you do it, have a recording device, using the knowledge and wisdom of these experts in different fields is always a solid place to get further information and facts. Okay, so just a couple of research resources. When you're finding information, you're going to probably find them from some such source as this. And as we're trying to build knowledge, we would find these to be useful for us. Okay, so next up, the textbook talks about, suppose that you have found a piece of information in one of these different various venues, and you're now concerned with another question, which is, how credible is this individual piece of information that I found on the internet, or that I saw like in a academic journal or a government document? Well, to assess the reliability of an individual piece of information, the textbook provides us with an acronym to help us with that. An acronym is like when you have letters that spell out a word, but each of the letters in the word stands for something, and it's to make the different concepts that form the word overall more memorable, right? Like, you guys remember the DARE program, Drug Abuse Resistance Education? So having the word DARE kind of makes it easier for you to remember what the individual letters of the acronym stand for, if you remember that. Well, anyway, the book has its own little acronym at this point. It's a bit of an awkward and, I think, maybe unfortunately labeled or titled acronym, but it's the CRAP test, okay? C-R-A-A-P, 2 A's. And this is a 5-point method of evaluation of pieces of information to see how trustworthy they should be for you. So here we go, the so-called CRAAP test. Now, each letter, as I said, stands for a different word that will help inform us about how we should be evaluating information that we find. So the first letter is C, stands for currency. And the word currency here, we're not talking about financial currency in that sense, but rather we mean the word in the sense of current, like up to date. So basically what it's referring to is, how recent is this information that you have found from wherever you found it? Is it new? Is it current? Is it cutting edge? Or is it old, outdated, and no longer relevant? Oftentimes, how recent the information is matters to how credible it is. Say, for example, that someone's trying to give you the argument that global warming is not a big deal, and they give you this piece of evidence to justify that. They say, look, I did my research, and I studied weather data from 1920 to 1960. And in that whole 40-year span, if you look at this graph, the data collected shows no significant increase in global temperatures over a 40-year time period. So how can you really say there's global warming? Well, what's the problem with that appeal to evidence? They're citing weather data from 1920 to 1960. And if you know anything about the issue of global warming, the spikes in global temperature have all really started to coalesce towards the tail end of the 20th and now the beginning of the 21st century. Since we started keeping meteorological data of global weathers in the 1850s to the current day, all the hottest years on record are all clustered towards the current decade. In the last 10 years, like 5 or 6 of the hottest years ever recorded have all happened almost back to back to back. So anyway, the point I'm making is that citing outdated weather information would not be current enough to really be giving the person's claim any credibility. Sometimes I'm on social media and I see people engaging in political debate and argument, and they link to an article about something that was done 2 or 3 administrations ago to make a critique of like current administration policy. Again, that might be outdated information that doesn't speak to the facts that we have before us now. So in general, with some exceptions, current data is better than older data. I guess in some cases you might be researching something from a past time period in which contemporary information isn't relevant, but other than those types of scenarios, we want the information to be more recent rather than dated. Okay, now the letter R, standing for the word relevance. And what that just is referring to is make sure the information that you're looking at least is related to the topic that you're trying to study. Sometimes research that people give can be thrown out automatically because it's not even on the same point or topic as the thing they're trying to gain knowledge about. Say that someone was looking at the fact that we've had more intense hurricanes in the last 20 or 30 years. And then they also looked at the fact that the divorce rate has increased a lot over the last 30 or 40 years. So they're saying, the divorce rate has steadily increased. Now it's like right at 50%. Half of people that get married that will end in divorce. And hurricanes have become more severe over that time period. So maybe there's a causation there. Maybe it is because people are not staying together in their marriages. Now we're getting all these hurricanes. Well, that would be a pretty irrelevant claim to the investigation of the cause of more severe hurricanes, because one is a social fact about makeup and breakup stuff, and the other has to do with weather patterns, and the two things cannot possibly be directly connected at all. So that would be irrelevant information. You'd be surprised how oftentimes people try to justify their view or their argument with appeal to evidence that is not at all relevant to the topic. So relevance is fundamental to go along with currency. Next, the first letter A, standing for authority. So by that, what we mean is who gave this information and what authority do they have to speak on this topic? Is this a person who's a professional in a field of study that knows about that kind of stuff, or is this just like a blogger or somebody with a nice website and a lot of opinions? Sometimes people can present information that is polished, that is sleek, that looks professionally done, but they still don't have the authoritative expertise or background to be someone that can talk about this stuff with any level of knowledge or detail. So you want to know who gave the information and whether that person actually stands as a qualified expert, someone that's not an expert, or even worse, somebody that doesn't know anything about it. Okay, and then the second letter A is for accuracy. I feel like that almost just goes without saying. But anyway, what it means is the information correct, truthful, factual, accurate? Sometimes information that we find online isn't even intended to be truthful. It's written as satire or parody, and I've seen a couple of times people reposting like articles from The Onion or from like the Babylon Bee, which are just satirical websites that try to appear to be news just for fun, and then share that and link to it as though this is a real actual piece of news or information. So know whether the information is intended as factual, and also be willing to go and do fact checks. Use Snopes, use PolitiFact, use different fact-checking websites that are run by nonpartisan sources to determine whether or not a claim that's been circulating online has truth to it, or whether it's already been debunked, etc. And then finally, the last letter P is for purpose. With this, you're basically being told to consider, why was this information created and disseminated? What was the purpose behind putting it out there? Did the person or institution or agency that put it out do it just to inform people with objective information? Or was it instead put there to sell a product, to advance an ideological agenda, or something along those lines? As an example of this, I have some people in my life that I really care about, but in one case, I'm frustrated because I have this person who they'll jump on to like the newest diet trend, whatever it is. They want to try it and see if it'll affect their fitness or wellness. Even if there's no kind of scientific evidence at all, and even contrary evidence against it being good for you. And I'll ask the person, I'll be like, why do you believe this stuff though? Why don't you just go with the scientific consensus views about what is good nutritional intake? And they'll say, oh, well, come on, there's evidence. Like this person, for example, they have a YouTube channel, they have like a whole website, go to their YouTube channel and see the claims they're making, and you'll see why I believe in it. And you go to their channel and stuff, and you see that they're making all these wild claims, like eliminate a bunch of stuff from your diet, just only eat potatoes, or whatever the random example of this like new age diet is. And then you'll see that the person's actually selling a diet plan and a book on the same topic. So it's like, it's not just learn about how to be healthy and I'm just trying to help you through life. It's like, buy my diet plan, and then buy my supplements, and then like subscribe to my like my website that will give you tips and hints, but it's only for subscribers. So in that case, the person has a vested interest in promoting their ideas. That's a financial interest, not necessarily just a pure academic interest. So knowing the purposes for which the information was given can help you to judge whether or not you should take it seriously or trust it. I think the most qualified and credible information is stuff that's put out by research institutions where there's just an academic funding source for the research and not like done by entrepreneurs and stuff trying to sell products to you on the free market. But anyway, there you go, the crap test. Keep these 5 points in mind as you go through the world encountering evidence, arguments, and information, because not every piece of information deserves your respect, and they're not all equally valid or credible, but having a sense of how to distinguish them along these lines will help you make some better calls, I think. Okay, so we've got that now in our notes. Okay, so next, let's see what I'm going to talk about next. After that, the book goes into some discussion of what it calls cognitive and perceptual errors in thinking. We want to have knowledge, but what keeps us from getting there sometimes is our own susceptibility to mental error in the processing of information. And those errors basically take the form of errors in thinking, cognitive errors, or errors in the way we perceive reality, perceptual errors. So we want to know what some of these cognitive and perceptual errors are so that we can guard ourselves against them and be a little bit more self-aware of our potential to commit them. It's not like only some people do this and not others. So you're like, you know, there's nothing wrong with you if you commit these cognitive errors. The best and brightest among us definitely do so. But the best we can do is to just know what they are so we can try and have a little bit of a better record going forward. So anyway, we're going to talk about these cognitive and perceptual errors in thinking. But before we do that, actually, I have to mention for you guys a little example that's given at that point in the textbook to bring you into the topic a little more and to make it more interesting. So they talk to us here about the War of the Worlds broadcast. So let me quickly mention that. Okay, so the War of the Worlds broadcast is an event in American history, which happened on October the 30th of 1938. So what is that, like around 82 some odd years ago? So I'm going to tell you guys a bit about it, but I wonder, has any of you ever heard of the War of the Worlds broadcast or know any basic background details on it? If so, let me know that. If you've never heard of it, then just say, no, I never heard of it. But I kind of wanted to give me a moment to collect my thoughts and hear from you. Anybody know about the War of the Worlds broadcast, even if it's vague or half remembered? Oh, so you do know about it, Philip? So I'm going to give a full-blown description of it. But Philip, what do you remember about it? Just give us a little, even something very small. Or Nathan or anybody who has heard about it. We're all going to learn about it right now. But I invite you to give me your very quick, simple summary of it. Even if you just had a few words. What do you think? I do this sometimes because it's interesting for me as a teacher to know whether I'm telling you from scratch or like how many people I'm meeting you halfway. Orson Welles novel, yes, that's right. But there's a little more that can be said about the way that it was broadcast on the radio. So Philip, you say you remember a popular radio show was reading a book called War of the Worlds and people thought it was current news. Basically, that's right, yeah. So very good, simple statement there. Let me just elaborate on it somewhat. Okay, so the year is 1938, and think about the average American household. Television isn't there yet. That's not going to happen until after World War II and even a little later into the early 50s and stuff. So if you wanted to sit around at the end of the day and have some kind of source of news, sports, entertainment, you wouldn't have the internet, you wouldn't have television either, but you would have the radio. So back then, the radio was like the staple of American households that would give them a sense of connection to like national news, world events, stuff that's happening in their local community, and also entertainment. So sometimes you tune into the radio and you hear people that are just describing the news, weather, and stuff like that. Other times you tune into the radio and they are doing color commentary for sporting events. Like, oh, he just hit it out of the park, and now they're rounding the bases, because you can't use video. So they would just narrate it as it's happening, color commentary. In other cases, the radio broadcast would be like of a novel that's being voice acted, right? And so that's just for entertainment purposes, so people can, like, hear voice acting and get the interesting experience of taking in these novels or stories or whatever they were, plays in some cases. So in one case, there was a novel by Orson Welles. This is a science fiction novelist, and he wrote a book called War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds, the plot line is basically that Martians were coming and invading the planet Earth, and they were dominating and taking it over with their flying saucers. So that's the theme of the novel. There have actually been a couple of films made about the same novel since then. Most recently, I think Tom Cruise acted in a version of War of the Worlds maybe 15 or something years ago. But anyway, that's the novel. Now, they were going to voice act this novel one night on the radio, and they did. But some people who had tuned into the show, I guess, a little later, didn't recognize that this was just entertainment purposes and thought that this was a news broadcast giving real current news. So because of that, these people with the false impression that it was really happening in reality, some of them became panicked, and they became so fearful and anxious that aliens were invading the planet that they freaked out. Some people even started to see things, like as though if you squinted really hard and you looked at the distant horizon, wait, can't you see there's one of the flying saucers? I could see it myself. And who knows what was really being seen? Is it just like a glint of light on the distant horizon or something else in their field of vision? But some people became in a heightened state of panic. I've even heard it reported by some that have talked about this event that some people, whether they were already depressed or inclined toward mental illness, I don't know, committed suicide because they thought that the world was being invaded by Martian aliens. I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard others say that that might have been an embellishment added in the years and generations since, but you can find that out on your own if you investigate. Either way, the point that the book wants to make is that this teaches us a lesson that our perception of the world can easily be shaped and even distorted by our social influences, right? By a person's self, they never would have started thinking, wait, I see aliens floating around in the horizon over there. But only because they heard a radio broadcast, which they took to be credible, did it shape the actual perceptual experience that they had from there. So we need to know that any number of us can make common cognitive and perceptual errors, sort of like those that are explained in the example given here. And that's why we have to pay attention to the possibility of these errors so that we can ward them off to the best extent possible. So that's what's next. We're going to go ahead now and start listing what some of these cognitive and perceptual errors can be. Cognitive and perceptual errors. So the first one mentioned is what is called misperception of random data. Misperception of random data. So the brain is very interesting. The human mind or brain is not just this passive receptacle of incoming information. It actually creates a picture of the world out of the raw material that's provided to us in sense data and sense perception. So sometimes the brain will fill in missing information that's not actually there to kind of make something more reasonable or comprehensible. And in other cases, information will get filtered out because it's not thought to the brain to be relevant to the perceptual episode. Sorry, I'm getting like hiccups, so give me a second. Okay, just takes a second. Back to the lecture. So the brain can basically sometimes add detail that wasn't originally there or remove details that were not judged necessary to the understanding of what's being perceived. And this can sometimes result in us seeing order or pattern which is not actually there. See, the brain hates an absence of structure when things are just random. So sometimes the mind will impose order or a pattern on something, which is actually, in reality, just random and meaningless. Think of the concept of like a Rorschach test in psychology. In that case, everyone knows that it's just a random assemblage of ink blots. And we ask the person seeing it, tell us what you see in these ink blots. And it's supposed to be revealing of something of their inner psychology, like, oh, I see my mean face of my father or something. But that kind of experience or phenomenon of seeing something that's not really there and just adding the structure with your mind is actually one of the common perceptual errors. So here's the definition. When we think we see order or pattern in something which is actually random. Okay, so that's misperception of random data. As a few examples of this, take a person with a creative imagination, just looking up at clouds in the sky, and starting to talk about how the clouds look to them to take on the shape of various specific objects. Like, oh, look at that cloud. Doesn't it look like a submarine? Or no, that one looks like an elephant. I'm pretty sure that one looks like the Eiffel Tower. So anyway, in cases like this, the person's sort of projecting some kind of order or structure onto the clouds that are accumulating in the sky. But obviously, they themselves don't have any kind of inherent structure or pattern. They're just the accumulation of water vapor in the Earth's atmosphere, not like an artwork that's created with the intended outcome of an artist. Sometimes people have said, oh, I see the face of the man in the moon, which of course, as you know, is just the discoloration and the pattern of impacts of the craters that have hit that surface, the lunar surface. People have sometimes even said that they see the face of like a divine religious figure in a discoloration on a piece of burnt toast, or the impact and weathering on the side of a tree branch or trunk. Other examples also could be mentioned. For example, you see people sometimes that have kind of supernatural beliefs look at the image projected in a satellite photo of like a hurricane from space, and they'll say like, oh, I see like a demonic looking face in that hurricane. Maybe this is the act of the devil. Or I think I see, it looks like a big fetus, this hurricane. Is this God trying to say he's punishing us for allowing abortion? Sometimes stress and fear can influence the tendency to misperceive random data as well. Have you ever watched like a scary film or something, and because of that, you got that sort of like feeling of fear, anxiety, apprehension, and if you're walking around after that, like to your car or at night and it's late, you might hustle to your car a little faster if you even hear small sounds or you see shadows cast around, because your imagination is taking these random pieces of the environment and kind of creating them into something that seems sinister, threatening, or maybe even like an attacker trailing you. Little children, we see this happening all the time, sleeping in a bedroom by themselves. They're scared of monsters. Why? Because they see like shadows cast about the walls and stuff. But obviously, this is just, again, the mind creating the structure, which is not in fact there. So anyway, just try to perceive things objectively. Don't allow your mind to get carried away and assume an order or a pattern in something that's not really there. In some cases in life, that would lead you to make the wrong decisions or to base actions on the wrong assumptions. Okay, misperception of random data, some examples and discussion of that. So as we continue from there, the next one mentioned in the book is memorable events error. Okay, so memorable events error is also interesting. One thing about the mind that's true is that we happen to more easily remember things that stand out from the ordinary, things that are unusual or uncommon, basically are easier for the mind to remember. So think about your last birthday. That's a special day for you. And so probably you have a memory of what you were doing then because of the fact that it's a special date on the calendar for you specifically. But if I just throw out a random date, like what were you doing 2020 on May 7th, unless that is a special day for you, right? Probably it would be hard for you to remember it unless you went back and you looked at your social media accounts or your old texts or something, and you tried to reconstruct the sequence of events by basically investigating your own behavior at that time. So it's just kind of lost after your short-term memory just gets rid of it because nothing special happened then. So it's an ordinary day. Ordinary days where nothing unconventional happens, just don't get remembered. It takes something unusual to kind of make it stand out. But that can lead us to make errors of judgment and thought. So let me give the definition here. The idea behind memorable events error is sometimes we place more importance or significance on things than they deserve, just because they're out of the ordinary, just because they're uncommon. So that's what this error is. When we place more importance on an event than it deserves, more significance, I'll say, on an event than it deserves. And why? Just because the event was uncommon. Okay, placing more significance on it than it deserves. Why? Just because it was uncommon. That's memorable events error. Okay, so here's an example the book gives to illustrate this concept. Oh no, not to worry, Elizabeth. Good to see you there. Glad that you're with us. And not to worry. But okay, so consider this. Car crashes, car accidents, accidents on the road, vehicular accidents. Those are pretty common, right? I mean, if you're a driver at all and you drive with any frequency, you're going to see auto accidents all the time, almost every day if you drive that much. Me, for sure, commuting around to schools before the pandemic, obviously, I would see people getting into accidents almost every day, not necessarily in front of me, but you look over on the shoulder, here's a car that's waiting for a tow truck, here's another car with actual damage. Sometimes it's a total loss, the car's not drivable. I've even seen, in some cases, cars on fire and stuff on the roads, and I wonder, how did that happen? Are these people even going to be okay? But the point is, long story short, car accidents are a common thing. They're so common, they're so regular to see that they become kind of normal to us. We kind of become numb to it. It's just another everyday common thing, seeing another car crash. So we don't pay much attention to them really, and we don't grant them much importance. But take, on the other hand, airplane crashes, aviation accidents. Now that is pretty rare. In fact, it's been a while since there's been any kind of major air accidents in the United States that have caused like a total loss of life on the plane. We've had some of the safest years on record in the past few years, and even before that, just in general, it's a highly reliable form of transportation. So maybe you've heard this said before, and it is true just as a matter of statistics, that you are safer in the plane traveling around and less likely to die by flight than by the roads in your car. In fact, car accidents are one of the leading causes of death in the United States. So if you just take the numerator to be the number of people dying using this form of transportation, and the denominator to be the number of people who use this form of transportation, you're way more at risk by driving than by flying. But because airplane accidents are unusual and uncommon, when they happen, they're a big deal. They occupy the national news media's attention, and we all kind of focus our mind on it because it stands out from the norm. So here's the weird thing. People generally, therefore, because these plane crashes are so uncommon, they pay more attention to them, they care more about them, they think they're more significant than they really are, just because they stand out from the ordinary. So overall, wouldn't you agree that people are probably more scared to fly than to drive? But this is actually not rational, because there's more risk involved in driving than flying. So as they say, and which is true, you're likelier to die on the drive over to the airport than you are to die on the flight that you'll take when you get there. But when people fly, it's often that their friends or family members will say this: make sure you text or call me as soon as you land. Why do they say that? Because they're having the paranoid thought that maybe you won't make the flight, and they want to know that it landed safely. But nobody ever says, call me or text me when you get to the airport. I just want to make sure that you didn't get hurt on the drive over. But of course, the fact is you are likelier to be harmed on that drive than you are on the plane itself. Now, some of you might be thinking this: crash for crash, though, I'd rather be in a car crash than a plane crash. Sure, that's fair. But even when we account for that, and yeah, you could say you tend to feel more in control when driving than flying. If we're just talking about numbers here, just do the numbers and do the math, you have a much greater chance, no matter, even if we made it mile for mile and we kind of, we accounted for the discrepancy in miles traveled and stuff, you have much more safety and security on the plane than on the than on the ground because of the number of auto traffic accidents that are fatal and so forth each year, compared with the number of aviation accidents, which are almost nil. So if we proportioned our fear rationally to the level of risk that we had, then we would have more concern and hesitance about the driving than the flying. Now, I don't know if that would be a better thing because we'd be kind of scared as we drive around, but maybe then we would drive a little more defensively, so it might be a good thing. Let me give you another example, okay, of the same kind of point. We've had a lot of shootings in America, mass shootings, school shootings. It's very sad to say that, but it's just true. A lot of high-powered weapons people can easily get, and a lot of mental illness and other issues that cause people to commit these terrible crimes. So, I mean, one thing I guess that's somewhat nice about the lockdown, if you can say that, is that there have not been as many of them because we're all separated from each other. But of course, we're having more loss of life off of the coronavirus than anything, so it's not exactly a better status quo. But anyway, the shootings and stuff became so frequent that, sad to say, we kind of almost started getting numb to it. It's like, oh, another mass shooting, another school shooting, just another day in America. Just, you know, that's to be expected almost after a while. And so just as I was saying before with car accidents, we kind of could get numb to that. You know, it's happening with such common frequency. It's no longer uncommon. So people aren't even really shocked. You know, you hear about a school shooting back in the 80s, you'd be like, wow, that's crazy. We've never heard of that. It's happening in 2020 or 2019, I guess. And people are like, oh, yeah, well, it's a given. People shoot everyone in America. So the school shootings and stuff, I'm telling you, people got kind of desensitized to it. And on the other hand, though, international terrorist attacks that kill American people, you know, from like an international terrorist organization like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or something. Now, that is pretty rare, and it is highly unusual and uncommon when an American dies by means of such an attack. So because that's uncommon and unusual, we focus so much more attention on it, and it seems like we worry much more about it. So what are we willing to, like, change all our laws and abandon our civil liberties for? This possibility of an international terrorist attack. But again, if you just look at statistics, which are publicly available, it's one of the least likely ways for you to die is on the basis of a foreign terrorist attack. You have a much, much greater chance of dying because of some insane psychopathic neighbor stockpiling weapons that goes nuts one day and kills a bunch of people in a public place. But we're not changing our laws concerning access to guns domestically, or at least not yet, to deal with that issue. But we are making it so that, you know, you have to take your shoes off at the airport, and, you know, we can monitor your cell phone calls and stuff, the NSA, just because we're so worried about the threat of the international terrorism, even though it's not at all as likely to cause material harm to you or your family or friends as domestic shooters, you know, people just losing their minds and killing you who are Americans. So anyway, once again, it looks like we're paying more attention and caring more and worrying more about the less common thing just because it's so standing out. And the more regular and repeatable and reliable phenomenon that is definitely a threat is being ignored just because we're used to it, you know? I mean, I think about COVID sometimes in that same sense. I mean, it's hard to ever get used to a pandemic, but so many people dying every day, thousands a day. It's almost like, man, we Americans living at this time, it's very tough. I think it's especially tough on young people because it gives you a hard time dealing with the gravity of death. It's like, it's almost like so many people dying all the time in the thousands. How can you process it? So in a way, you just shut down and you stop worrying or thinking so much about death. But what could be more important than protecting your own life and surviving? So it's kind of sometimes a mess, but we do our best. Knowing about this memorable events error, try to proportion your rational assessment of risk to the actual degree of risk that you face in a situation. Don't just operate off of some sort of subjective and overblown sense of what's risky or not risky to you. Try and look at the actual facts and statistics and act in accordance with that. Okay, so that's a memorable events error. Maybe since I haven't looked at it in a little while, to kind of just connect what I'm saying here to the things that are in this book, I'll just read a bit on that. Here's what it says. Yeah, so it says, memorable events error involves our ability to vividly remember outstanding events. Scientists have discovered channels in the brain that actually hinder most long-term memories by screening out the mundane incidents in everyday life. However, these memory-impairing channels appear to close down during outstanding events. For example, most American adults remember exactly where they were and what they were doing on September 11, 2001. I can remember that. I'm old enough to remember that. Probably a lot of you guys not old enough to have memories of that. But what's an event that's similar to 9/11 in terms of everyone knows where they were? Maybe January the 6th, a couple months ago, the Capitol was breached. I don't know. What was a big event for you guys that you feel like you'll always remember where you were when that happened? I'm curious about that, sort of to take a moment aside from the lecture. For people Gen Z type like you, what do you think was the biggest event of your life? Was it like a single day, a date that you say you always remember? Or is there one? I wonder. Well, you let me know maybe as the chat continues, but I'll continue reading here. Most Americans remember exactly where they were on that date. However, if you ask someone where they were or what they were doing on an ordinary weekday 2 months ago, most people would not be able to remember, or would only remember if they could think of something special that happened on that day. To use another example, airplane crashes and fatalities are reported in the national media. Trump gaining the presidency, okay, so that was November 8th, I think, of 2016. I definitely remember that one too. It was an interesting day. So to use another example, airplane crashes and fatalities are reported in the national media, whereas automobile fatalities generally are not. However, per mile traveled, airplane travel is far safer. We're 16 times more likely to be killed in an auto accident than an airplane accident. In fact, traffic accidents are one of the leading causes of death and disability of people between the age of 15 and 44. However, the memorable events era exerts such control over our thinking that even after being informed of these statistics, many of us still continue to be more nervous about flying than driving. A little bit more, memorable events era is sometimes tied with confirmation bias, in which we tend to remember events that confirm our beliefs and forget those that are contrary to our beliefs. A popular belief in the United States is that death takes a holiday, that terminally ill patients can postpone their death until after an important holiday or birthday. In fact, this belief is based purely on wishful thinking and anecdotal evidence. In an analysis of the death certificates of more than 1 million people who died from cancer, biostatisticians have found no evidence that there is a reduction in death rates prior to a holiday or important event. Personal and social beliefs are remarkably strong, even in the face of empirical evidence that logically should be devastating. And when these results were published, those researchers received several angry emails criticizing them for taking away people's hope. I don't know. Okay, so a little bit of discussion from the book. It's funny about Peachy here, my cat. I had an Instagram picture over the other day, and my brother Danny was commented, and he says, she looks like a Dr. Seuss character. She looked like the Grinch. And I thought that was so funny because, yeah, she's got this belly, and the rest of her is pretty thin. So if you look at photos of the Grinch from the old Dr. Seuss, she kind of looks like him. Peachy, no. I'm going to take her, put her down. Okay. So there's more to say about Chapter 4. But here's the thing, guys. I don't want to rush through it because we have a whole additional meeting on Tuesday to finish it out. And at the current pace, I think we'll probably finish that meeting a little early. So I'm probably going to bring in a video that I sometimes show on the topic of false memory to kind of fill in some of the extra time. But even concerning that, I want to have enough leftover material to make through a significant part of the meeting on Tuesday. So I'm pretty much looking at it this way. We got 12 minutes left in the official class period, but if I cut it now, I think the pacing will be a little bit better on Tuesday. So if you guys don't mind, then maybe we'll just let it go for now. Make sure to finish reading Chapter 4, though, over the weekend if you haven't done it already. And next week, after we do finish Chapter 4 on Tuesday, then Thursday next week and the following Tuesday, we have 2 review sessions. So I'll distribute the study guide for everybody at kind of late in the weekend or whatever. And then we'll use that to review for Thursday next week and Tuesday the following week. Then Thursday the 25th is when we have our midterm exam. So just a few things, keeping up the schedule. And then we'll be all good for spring break, and we'll come back after that. So are we all good, everyone? Just let me know here in the chat. Let me get some reaction from you. I don't like closing the stream when I think there's still goodbyes to be said or questions to be asked or whatever. So let me just know, and then I'll be able to let us go for the moment. Is everything fine? Are we all good? If you do have questions, let me know, and I'm happy to answer those. But all right, cool. Well, thanks, Nathan, Lan, and everybody else. Hope you guys are having a good week. Thanks for being here. Continue to attend, and we just have a few more meetings before it's midterm time. So all right then, guys. Have a great weekend, and I'll be in touch by email if you do need anything. Until then, have a great one. I'll see you soon.